Max Verstappen owns a $35,000 sim racing rig and once stayed up until 3 in the morning racing virtually the night before a Grand Prix. Most people called it reckless, but Toto Wolff just called it an advantage. The 2026 Formula One regulations bring the biggest technical overhaul the sport has ever seen. And according to multiple team bosses, drivers who have spent years mastering energy management in simulators are about to gain a serious edge. What exactly are these new rules? Why does sim racing translate so directly? And is this really why Hamilton might struggle at Ferrari next year? Keep watching, because this will surprise you. Verstappen's simulator racing career started seriously in 2015, when he officially joined Team Redline while still racing for Toro Rosso. The connection happened through Atze Kirchhoff, Team Redline's manager who had worked with Verstappen during his Formula 3 days and noticed something unusual about the teenager's approach to virtual racing. Most drivers treated simulators as training tools, but Verstappen treated them as another form of competition entirely. That mentality turned him into one of sim racing's elite drivers over the following decade. 2024 alone saw him complete a complete sweep of iRacing's 3 biggest 24-hour events, winning the virtual Daytona, Nürburgring and Spa endurance races back to back to back. The Nürburgring victory stands out because he drove a 2.5-hour night stint on Saturday evening, slept a few hours, then woke up and won the actual Imola Grand Prix on Sunday. 2 victories in 2 different worlds separated by less than a day. His dedication runs deeper than the wins suggest. Verstappen has admitted that sometimes he wakes up in the middle of the night with setup ideas and has to test them immediately because waiting until morning feels impossible. When he moved apartments, the entire house sat empty except for his sim rig, which he refused to disassemble before a race weekend. The equipment travels with him constantly, shipped in trailers to Grand Prix locations so he can practice between sessions. All of this matters because of what arrives in 2026. The regulations coming next year represent the most complete overhaul Formula One has ever attempted in a single season. Rule changes historically affect either the chassis or the engine, rarely both at once, but 2026 rewrites everything simultaneously. Teams haven't faced a comparable reset in decades, and the drivers who adapt fastest will define the new era. The power split tells the whole story in one number. Current F1 cars run roughly 80% combustion power and 20% electric, and that ratio flips to 50% combustion and 50% electric in 2026. Internal combustion engine output drops from around 850 horsepower down to approximately 540 horsepower, while electrical power jumps from 160 horsepower all the way to 470 horsepower. That jump represents a nearly 300% increase in what the battery delivers to the wheels. Several other changes compound the challenge facing drivers and teams. The MGU-H, which currently harvests energy from exhaust heat, disappears entirely from the regulations. Fuel consumption drops 30%, falling from 100 kilograms per race to just 70 kilograms. The cars themselves shrink by 200 millimeters in length and by 100 millimeters in width, while shedding 30 kilograms from the minimum weight. Every aspect of how these machines move and respond will feel unfamiliar. What matters most is what drivers will need to do behind the wheel every single lap. Active aerodynamics replace the current drag reduction system, with both front and rear wings becoming adjustable between high downforce mode for corners and low drag mode for straights. A new overtake mode grants trailing drivers extra electrical energy when they are within 1 second of the car ahead. And here is the thing that changes everything. Drivers will manage battery deployment in real time throughout every lap, constantly deciding where to spend their electric power and where to harvest it back. This creates what Toto Wolff calls a chess component to racing. With 50% electric and 50% combustion, drivers will need to compensate for lack of electric power on every single lap, particularly on the long straights. The question becomes, where does the driver deploy energy, and who prepared better for these split-second decisions? Wolff believes the sim driver generation holds the advantage here, and he named Max Verstappen and George Russell specifically as drivers who work on simulators and genuinely enjoy that environment. His reasoning makes sense when you consider what these new cars demand. Overtakes will happen in 2026 at locations where passing never occurred before. If one driver sits at the bottom of their battery charge while the car behind has more stored energy, that trailing driver can suddenly jump past at a corner where overtaking was previously impossible. Reading these situations and reacting instantly requires a mental framework that repetition builds over time. Red Bull's Helmut Marko sees the same advantage forming. The driver has to be smart and clever about how to use power from the battery, and there is one driver who can drive fast and think at the same time. That combination should create separation when everyone else struggles to process the new demands. Research supports what these team bosses observe from experience. Studies on professional motion simulators show they achieve around 90% real-world equivalency in measured driver performance, with the realism extending beyond physical feedback into cognitive processing. Drivers learn actual skills that transfer directly to real cars, which explains why sim racing produces legitimate talent rather than just gaming ability. Verstappen rates sim racing accuracy at 90 to 95% compared to the real thing. The missing 5% comes from strapping into an actual car and feeling the G-forces push against your body, but the decision-making transfers completely. Professional sim racers who compete against Verstappen describe his adaptation speed as unlike anything they have witnessed. Every week or even every day, sim racing forces you to drive different cars on different tracks, and that constant adaptation builds something that shows up clearly when Verstappen arrives at a new Formula One circuit and runs a full second faster than anyone else for the first 50 minutes. Now consider how Lewis Hamilton approaches the same technology. 20 laps per year is all Hamilton does on a simulator, and he has been open about why that number stays so low. Simulators feel disorienting to him because the mind registers movement that the body does not experience through G-forces. Hamilton says he can drive the same track in real life, then use the simulator on Monday and find the bumps missing, the curbs different, and the sense of speed completely off from reality. The disconnect bothers him enough that he avoids simulation almost entirely. 7 world championships prove this approach worked brilliantly across Hamilton's career, and nobody can argue with results like those. 2026 presents a different kind of challenge, though. When every lap demands real-time decisions about energy deployment, the driver who has made those decisions thousands of times in virtual endurance races carries an advantage over someone who never practiced them outside an actual F1 car. Hamilton's experience and racecraft remain elite, but the specific skill these regulations reward is one he has not developed. Red Bull's technical director for powertrains sees this as an opportunity for Verstappen to further separate himself from the competition. The new power unit creates an energy management challenge. It requires a different skill set from drivers, and extracting optimal lap time from this system will prove tricky for everyone. How you drive matters enormously, and Verstappen already thinks about racing in the terms these regulations demand. Verstappen visited Red Bull powertrains to hear the 2026 engine run, and what stood out was the depth of his questions about how the systems interact. That understanding probably represents part of his advantage already, because he approaches the technical side with genuine curiosity rather than treating it as information engineers handle separately. History shows what happens when regulations change this dramatically. Major rule shifts have consistently reset the competitive order in Formula One, shuffling the hierarchy in ways nobody predicted. 2014 brought turbo-hybrid engines to the sport, and Mercedes dominated from the first race onward, winning 16 of 19 events, while Red Bull fell from 4 consecutive Constructors' Championships into the midfield. 2022 flipped that script when Red Bull mastered the new ground effect regulations, while Mercedes struggled badly enough to win only a single race despite holding 8 consecutive constructors' titles. The 2022 regulations represented the biggest change in 30 years of Formula One, and 2026 dwarfs even that reset. New tyres, new fuel, a new engine, a new chassis, and new sporting regulations, all arriving simultaneously, mean everyone starts from scratch. Adaptability determines who survives that kind of upheaval, and adaptability is exactly what sim racing develops through constant exposure to unfamiliar situations. 10 years of preparation went into building that capability for Verstappen, even though he had no idea the 2026 rules would demand exactly these skills. The regulations require real-time strategic thinking about energy deployment while driving at the absolute limit. And Verstappen has logged thousands of hours making precisely those decisions under competitive pressure against elite opponents. Races where he put in 50 hours of practice beforehand ended with him destroying fields filled with the best sim drivers in the world. When Verstappen won both the virtual Nürburgring 24-hour race and the Imola Grand Prix within hours of each other, Christian Horner noted simply that Max had won 2 races that day, one in a BMW M3 and one in a Formula One car. The observation captured something about how Verstappen approaches competition that extends beyond any single discipline. 2026 arrives and those two worlds stop being separate competitions. The skills transfer directly, the mental frameworks overlap completely, and the thousands of hours suddenly count toward the championship that matters most. Only one driver has spent a decade mastering virtual and real racing simultaneously, building exactly the cognitive muscles these regulations demand. That driver already knows how to think while driving at the limit, and he has been practicing for this moment since long before anyone knew it was coming.